This is Not Worth Living, a podcast that features creatives interviewing themselves with a preset list of questions. Unlike other podcasts that feel like conversation between friends, this one aims to feel like eavesdropping on a psychiatrist's visit. Today's episode features...
Hello, my name is Meghan Lamb. I'm the author of the horror story cycle Mirror Translation that's forthcoming from Blamage Books, the novel Coward, which came out with Spuyten Duyvil in 2022, the novel Failure to Thrive, which was released by Apocalypse Party in 2021, All of Your Most Private Places, which was released by Spork Press right literally a week before the pandemic started in 2020, and the novella Silk Flowers, which is sadly out of print, but which was released by the wonderful small press Birds of Lace in 2017. My work has also appeared in Quarterly West, Diagram, Redivider, Passages North, and other publications, and I'm currently teaching at the University of Chicago, Story Studio, and GrubStreet. In case it isn't obvious, I teach creative writing. So, in response to these questions, the first one, what makes you tick? I guess my answer would be uncanny surprises, whether those are surprises of language or things that are happening in my environment that make me feel somehow differently towards something that my mind doesn't often notice, whether it's something that's too familiar or commonplace for me to register it as important, or just something I don't often think about. Sorry, I'm drinking coffee. So if I'm pausing, it's probably to drink coffee. And if my answers are a little foggy, it might be because of that. I'm trying to record these answers early in the morning before Robert's Zoom meetings start in the other room, so my audio won't bother him. The second question is, would you open an envelope with your death date? And I didn't have to think about this too hard. My answer would be yes. I would absolutely, for one, I would be way too curious not to know. And I feel like knowing my death date would shape a lot of my decisions about the rest of my life. Whether or not I decided to reveal that to other people. Maybe that's another question that would take a lot more thought for me. For some reason, there's no question of whether or not I would want to know, but I'm not sure I would want other people to know. But yes, I would want to know in advance of my death when I was going to die, so I could prioritize what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do in terms of how much time I had left. The next question is, what was the first time you remember intentionally, or what was the first time you remember creating something intentionally? That was a really interesting question, but I guess the first time that I remember creating something intentionally was when I was in elementary school, starting in first grade. We had this journal time in the day where we were required to write about things that we had done earlier in the week, or to just free write about whatever was on our minds. And that was really the first time I had a built-in consistent writing practice in my life, to the degree that it was something that I not only looked forward to, but compelled me to go around in my environment and look for things, gather things to write about during that journaling time that I knew was on the horizon. yeah, when I was in first grade, I remember like going for walks with my dad. He was really into hiking, and I wouldn't usually carry a notebook with me, but I would always be like thinking about things that I was encountering in order to write about them in this built-in journal time at school. So yeah, that experience of being required to gather from life and collect experiences to later write down was kind of the first experience I had with intentionally creating something. I also, I talked about this in another podcast I was on recently. Writers read their early shit. But when I was around the same age, I started keeping not only these written diaries, but these notebooks full of weird drawings of ladies and men sometimes, but most often ladies in what I thought at the time to be period garments. But I would draw like this elaborate dress, like from the dress down, like from the feet down and like up to the head. So there'd be room for the dress in the drawing. And I would put like a date underneath. I guess it was supposed to be like the date of a photograph or the date of the period of costume that the person was wearing. But I also, like looking back at it, I was wondering if maybe they were supposed to be death dates. Like I remember looking in photo albums at my grandmother's house and at her siblings' houses when I was a little kid, and like just pointing to people in like the old black and white and sometimes even tintype photographs, because they had some of those, and that was the first time I ever saw some of those in real life. But I'd be like, is that person dead? Is that person dead? Knowing that like this is so old, they've got to be dead. And I would get kind of excited by that in a weird way. But yeah, I kept this journal of, I guess maybe drawings of dead people in dresses. So that's another example of early intentional creation. The next question is, what keeps you motivated? It's definitely something I've been thinking about a lot lately. Especially since I'm as I'll probably talk about later, I'm a liminal writer. Like I am not one of those people who can like just sit down and write every day, no matter what's on my mind, no matter what I have going on. It feels very selfish to me, writing, and it's something that I really have to give myself permission to disappear into and disappear from other things. But I only feel comfortable allowing myself to do that completely in the way that I need to for small liminal pockets of time. And because writing feels so selfish so often, and sometimes feels like it pulls me away from the things that give me a livelihood or the things that I do for other people that keep me connected to day-to-day life, and because publishing at any level is such a fraught process anymore, it's become a real question, the question of what keeps me motivated. But the thing that I keep coming back to is this idea of someone, not only that I'd never expect to find my writing, but maybe someone that I'd never expect on the surface to be able to connect with my writing, coming across it and like making some surprising discovery or connection that I couldn't possibly anticipate. I experienced this for the first time when I published Silk Flowers. Like, it was just this little weird novella based on, like, it's very fictionalized, but I was kind of writing toward this bizarre experience that I had when I was 25. I had been kneeling down, not for very long, for like 30 seconds. And when I stood up, it was like my left leg had fallen asleep. Except I sat there like rubbing it, trying to get the nerve to wake up. And it was like my legs stayed asleep for a year, basically. Or like 9 months before the nerves started to regenerate. Like when I went to stand up, like I was kind of like rubbing it for like half an hour, kind of gaslighting myself into thinking like, oh, the feeling's coming back, but it never did. And when I stood up and like went to, I was at my friend's apartment, and he had like a weird, like walk up into the apartment, where you would like walk from the stairwell up a tiny staircase into the apartment. And that staircase was right by the couch where I was trying to rub my leg back into livelihood. And I just like fell down that set of stairs. And I realized like, oh, this leg is just dead weight. But yeah, like I went to, long story short, a series of specialists, including a neurologist that I went to several times, and I had an EKG, or an EMG. I forget what all the freaking acronyms are. I was tested for like anything it could have possibly been, and there was like no explanation other than, yes, you have perineal neuropathy in your left leg, in this nerve. It went up to like my mid thigh and like went all the way down to the very bottom of my foot. I had a foot drop, so I like basically my brain would tell my leg to move in certain ways, but my leg wouldn't get the message because my nerve was demyelinated. How it got demyelinated, they didn't know, and nobody was ever able to figure out. But that's apparently not all that unusual with neuropathies. Over a third of neuropathies are idiopathic neuropathies that are never diagnosed to satisfaction. But my first novella, Silk Flowers, is about a person who has a strange nerve condition, and is kind of trying to navigate through that as she disintegrates, and also like her husband's responses to that condition. But sorry, this is really taking a loop. The question was, what keeps you motivated? And I put that book out with a very small micro press. I did a short round of readings across the country, but it had probably as big of a readership as a book published at that level could really have, but it didn't have a ton of exposure just by nature of what the book was and how I published it. But like 2 years later, a person, like a complete stranger, actually a couple complete strangers, but this one complete stranger in particular, contacted me and said, like, I have a disorder that feels exactly like what's described in Silk Flowers, and I feel like I've never had a language for my experiences, and when I try to tell other people about it, they think I'm completely crazy, and I've just felt so alone and so isolated in this physical and psychological experience. And this book has really like given voice to something that I've felt that I needed to see in print. And yeah, I didn't know this person. I have no idea how they freaking found my book, but it meant a lot to me, just the idea that someone who needed my work, like if it wasn't out there in the world in some capacity, they wouldn't be able to find it. So I guess that ethereal possibility is what keeps me motivated. The idea that someone out there might need or might get something out of what I'm doing, and creating it and putting it out there into the world gives them the opportunity to find it. I certainly know that I've discovered writing and art and music in my own life that's done that for me. So I want to do that for other people. So the next question is, who inspires you at the moment? My immediate answer to that question is maybe pretty boring or sappy, but it's definitely Robert Kloss, my husband. He inspires me in so many ways because, well, for one, his writing practice is so different from my own. He is one of those writers, and I talk about this all the time with my students as examples of like different processes and different practices, but he is one of those writers who sits down and writes every day and gets some measure of writing done every day. But he's a much more incremental writer than I am. I tend to need to think about things and like have more scaffolding up front, but I don't know. I guess there's something about like seeing his process, like without still like I see him writing every day. I see that he sits down at a desk and he has this gradually accumulating and morphing stack of books that are related presumably in some way to what he's working on. But yeah, at the same time, it's totally mysterious to me. But sorry, I live by a hospital, so if I'm talking for any measure of time, you're going to hear ambulances in the background. But yeah, there's something about like I know he's making daily discoveries. Sometimes he doesn't share a lot about his process, maybe because he doesn't articulate it so much to himself. But he'll tell me that sometimes he'll spend like the whole day of what he's working on in like a single sentence, or sometimes he'll be like trying to describe a staircase in a house that he's trying to write toward, and he'll spend the whole day like fretting over this description and end up feeling like he needs to cut that part out later, or like set it aside. But so much of his process is a process of discovery, like maybe discovering what he really needs to write within like the effort of trying to write something that he doesn't actually need to write, and a process of assemblage, like figuring out what needs to be there, sometimes from the labor of struggling with something that maybe doesn't need to be there. But I guess in seeing the inverse of my own process, I'm inspired to pursue certain kinds of structure with my own process that I wouldn't pursue, but also like I think part of the reason I typically write in liminal pockets is that that's what I tell myself I need to have freedom to write and to write freely and make discoveries. And I guess seeing the way Robert writes makes me realize that you can create that freedom within pockets in different ways other than just having this like precious unfettered time that I so often don't actually have. I also, because I feel like talking about your significant other is like a boring pat answer. I also wanted to say before I move on, I'm really inspired by like just being with Robert gives me a feeling of freedom to experiment and just a feeling of freedom to do weird, disturbing shit that I maybe didn't feel in past relationships. And that's very important to me. I've also been thinking other people who inspire me at the moment. I recently taught a class that entailed readings of these two authors, so maybe that's why I'm biased toward them. But I've been thinking a lot about Sophie Calle and how I admire how all of her projects are like a kind of like investigation, or like I like the idea of like everything she creates, like the project is like kind of not like a hypothesis, but like a question or a weird compulsion or obsession that she then pursues. And I'm sure she like fictionalizes some of what she sees. Like a couple years ago, I taught from that book Hotel, where she takes a job at a hotel in Venice and is like taking all of these photographs of like objects she finds around people's rooms, and some of them like look way too perfect to not have been staged. But I love something about the idea of writing and art making as an inherently voyeuristic project or voyeuristic investigation, and I love that she embraces that. I recently taught a class on the walking narrative where we read Sweet Venetian, where she follows a guy around and is kind of not only documenting what she sees him doing, but documenting her whole process of how she follows him and kind of how she gets away with it. But some of my students thought it was creepy, but then I had them follow each other around for a day, and they were like, that was so fascinating, that was so interesting, I want to do it again. So yeah, I've been thinking about Sophie Calle a lot, and I've been inspired by these projects of voyeurism. I've also been really inspired by Annie Ernaux and just her particular breed of autofiction, and particularly the ways she will rewrite toward an experience of her life that she's already written about, or sometimes like write several books about the same experience, and other times it's a matter of publishing a book of like more finished writing, or more curated writing around a particular lived experience, and then later publishing like a diary or something that's more raw that she's written toward that same experience. I'm teaching a class this fall actually on radical revision, where I'm teaching several examples of these texts that she wrote in a more raw form and then later published in a more cultivated, curated form. And I guess I'm kind of asking the question, like, is this even something that we can consider a revision, or how does this fit into your personal understanding of revision? But yeah, I think she's really interesting. And that plays into the next question, which is, what's your latest project? I am actually working on 2 projects at the same time right now, which is so weird for me. I never do that. And they're ostensibly nonfiction projects, although in my various ways, like they're really autofiction. I've done a lot of fictionalizing from the standpoint of filling in memory and playing with the artifice of memory in a deliberate way. But I've been working on one book, which I've been thinking of as being kind of analogous to Annie Ernaux's book, Exteriors, and another book that I think of as being kind of analogous to her longer, more expansive project, The Years. But the project that's kind of analogous to Exteriors is this book that I've been working on for 2 years, or I've been working on from the standpoint of writing notes toward. I only just started to assemble it into a book object, but it's been coming together really quickly because I had all of this pre-writing toward it. But it's called CTA People, or I'm calling it CTA People. And it's kind of just what it sounds like. It's all encounters and observations I've had of people on the CTA, the Chicago Transit Authority, on the the train. And the other project is called, or at least I'm calling it for now, Le Temps de l'ombre d'un souvenir, which is a line from the Jacques Brel song Jaurès. It loosely translates to Time of a Shadow of a Memory. But that book is kind of a travelogue based on this trip that Robert and I took with my parents to France over the summer. But really, more than that, it is kind of becoming a meditation on death and like kind of the concept of taking inventory of a life. My parents are retiring this year, so they're kind of working their way through their bucket list trips, quote unquote. And the book is kind of an exploration of what these trips mean, these looking forward to the end of your life inventories, and how a trip or our travels align with that kind of inventory taking, death-looking inventory taking. The next question is, if money was no object, what would be your dream project? That's something I also think about a lot. But really, my dream project would be having enough money to have freedom. Like, I don't have any particular dream project. My dream project would be not having to come up with a project. It would be having the freedom to move about the world and observe people and engage with life and just serendipitously discover my projects rather than feel this pressure to create or to constantly have projects. I don't know. When I was younger, it felt important to always have a project and always have like a series of projects lined up after the next one. I guess because when you're young, you have this anxiety that like you're going to reach a point where your brain stops or something. And I guess we all do. But I feel like so often, I guess I've written enough long things that have taken several years that I now realize that so much of the project is not the thing that you decide you're working on before you start working on it, but rather the discovery that you make about yourself in the course of doing the thing. But yeah, I guess that would be my dream project, is to just have more freedom to do the thing and make discoveries. The next question is somewhat related to that, I guess. Is there a quote or motto that you live by? And I don't think there is so much, other than what I just described, the idea that the process is the thing as much as the end product. But I've been thinking a lot lately about this interview with Annie Ernaux, speaking of one of my earlier answers. But she talks about kind of her ethos toward writing autofiction, or what her whole orientation to the truth is in writing. And she says, more or less, like, I'm oversimplifying in my paraphrasing, but she says, like, I'm not trying to write something nice. I'm trying to write something right. I'm not trying to create something beautiful. I'm trying to create something that feels right. And I guess what she means by that is, to the degree that her writing is aestheticized or stylized, it's toward the aim of making something feel right, have the feeling of fact for her, rather than feeling like some idea of beautiful or epiphantic writing, or sometimes that might mean she has to use simpler language, or simplify her reference. But yeah, I've been thinking about, like, what that means for me, like, to write something right versus something nice or beautiful. And I don't know that I know still, but I guess that question has been guiding me lately, in the way that a motto that I work by might. The next question is, would you be friends with yourself? That's an adorable question. Yes, I think I would be friends with myself. And I don't know, honestly, if I'm saying that just because I feel like I have to in order to live with myself. There have definitely been times in my life where I don't think I'd be friends with myself, and there I have days when I don't know if I'd be friends with myself. But on the whole, I think I would be friends with myself. Okay, and I can hear that Robert's class has just started. I hope it's not too intrusive in the background. The next question is, what do you do differently from other people? And I have a real hard time like answering this with what feels like the necessary humility. This is also something from a class that I taught recently, of course, because these are the only things that are ever, like, on the top of my mind. But in my walking narratives class, I taught some excerpts from Walking in Berlin, A Flaneur in the Capital, by Franz Essel. And the first essay, The Suspect, has this passage that stood out to me that I've been thinking about lately, or this moment in his wandering that I've been thinking about lately. When twilight falls, old and young women lean at the windows, propped up on pillows. I feel for them what psychologists describe with words like empathy, in quotes. But they won't allow me to wait alongside them. I wait alone and for nothing. And I don't know, I was really struck by that empathy, in quotes, and that idea of like you read so many things where like the flunner is like encountering a subject in the wild and they're like, oh, I felt this empathy toward them, or they kind of take for granted, I guess, that what they're feeling is empathy. And I liked this subtle interrogation of that word, and also the idea that empathy is something that you can be allowed to feel or allowed into by merit of others like noticing you trying to feel empathy and like basically saying like, yes, you have permission to feel that toward me. But yeah, this is all to say, I think when I think about something that I do differently from other people, I think I'm good at writing toward that particular experience or inability to experience, lack of permission to experience, perhaps, empathy. I can write toward not only moments where empathy or the desire to connect with others meets its limits, but perhaps those moments where we can't connect with others, or we aren't allowed to connect with others because of that very desire, if that makes any kind of sense. I like to think that in the things that I write, it does make a kind of sense, or one experiences the kind of sense-making I'm trying to make. And the final question is, what would you like your epitaph to say? I struggled with this one. I recently, like just back in July, decided, because of the proverbial artistic differences, to leave the band that I'd been in for several years and had a long history with. I went down like a weird rabbit hole of depression for like a week where this sounds really morbid, but I was really identifying intensely with Ian Curtis, and the period particularly where he saw Joy Division going on without him, and he really felt like a band has reached its artistic apex and I can't do any more with it. But I was reading his widow's, I hesitate to call it a biography of Ian Curtis. I'm not quite sure what to call it. It's a weirdly exacting and precise recollection of moments and experiences, but at the same time it's like written with this like almost weird flat affect where the things that she notices and the things that she cares about, Deborah Curtis, Ian Curtis's widow, are just the complete opposite of what would be interesting for me to hear about. But anyway, by way of epitaph, that book is called Touching from a Distance, and obviously it's a line from a Joy Division song that Deborah Curtis chose to take. And I was also thinking about the epitaph that's on Ian Curtis's grave, Love Will Tear Us Apart, and that was what she chose to put on his grave. But I guess I was challenging myself to think of like a line from my own music or a line from one of my own songs that would be a good epitaph. And the only thing I could think of was a line from the last album that Robert and I made that's kind of companion to Mere Translation, my book that's coming out with Blamage. But the song is called This Is Not Mine, and so much of the song is just me screaming, "This is not mine!" So I guess this is all to say, I think my epitaph would be, or epigraph or epitaph, like I'm not looking at that question now, I always get those two words mixed up. But anyway, it would just be, "This is not mine," in like scrawly all caps, like written all down the tomb over and over again. And yeah, I guess I've answered all the questions. I guess that's that, Mattress Man.